I was born in a small mining town in the north of England, where the air was thick with coal dust and the ground trembled beneath our feet. My father worked deep underground, his hands blackened, his back bent from years of labor. We were poor, but we were happy, my mother, my little sister Mary, and me. Our cottage was small, but it was ours. At least until the railway men came. One cold morning, a man in a fine coat arrived with papers declaring that our land was needed for the expansion of the railway. My father argued, begged, but it was no use. The law was on their side. We were given a week to leave. My mother wept as we packed what little we had. Mary, only 6 years old, clung to my hand, her eyes wide with fear. With nowhere else to go, we sought shelter at the estate of Mr. Thorne, the owner of the largest mine in the county. He was a hard man, with a face like chiseled stone. But he offered us work and a place to stay, a drafty attic above the stables. My father returned to the mines, his spirit broken. My mother took in sewing, her fingers bleeding from the endless stitches. I was put to work as a stable boy, mucking out stalls and tending to Thorne's prized horses. The work was grueling, but it was nothing compared to what my father endured. The mine was a death trap, collapses were common, and men were worked until they dropped. Thorne didn't care. He counted his coins while men died in the dark. One evening, Mary fell ill. The damp cold of the attic had seeped into her lungs. My mother begged Thorne for a doctor, but he refused. "She's just a miner's daughter," he sneered. "The weak don't survive here." 3 days later, Mary was gone. I held her small, lifeless hand, my tears falling onto her pale face. That night, as the wind howled outside, I made a vow that I would make Thorne pay. The wind howled through the cracks in the stable walls, a sound that had become as familiar to me as my own breath. It had been a month since Mary's death, and the house, if you could even call it that, felt colder than ever. Mother moved through the days like a shadow, her hands trembling as she sewed, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke at all. Father was worse. He still went down into the mines, but his eyes were empty, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the earth itself. I had tried to talk to him once, to tell him about the anger burning inside me, but he just stared at the fire and said nothing. It was as if part of him had died with Mary, buried deep where no one could reach it. I couldn't stand it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face pale, lifeless. Her small fingers curled around the ragged doll she had loved so much. And then I saw Thorne's face, cold and indifferent, as if her death meant nothing more than a lost shilling. One evening, as I cleaned the stables, I overheard 2 of Thorne's men talking. They were rough men, their faces scarred from fights and hard living, but they spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid of being heard. "You seen the new lot they brought in," one muttered. "Irish, desperate for work. Thorne's paying 'em half what he pays the rest." The other spat on the ground. And when they drop dead from the fumes, he'll just bring in more, cheaper than fixing the vents." My hands clenched around the pitchfork. It was always the same. More men, more suffering, more profit for Thorne. I had heard stories of mines collapsing, of men choking on bad air, their bodies left underground because it was too costly to retrieve them. And Thorne, he dined in his manor, drinking wine that cost more than a miner's monthly wage. That night, I made my decision. I couldn't stay here, watching my parents waste away, watching men die, for nothing. I had to leave, but not without a plan. I waited until the house was silent, then crept to the small chest where Mother kept what little money we had, a few coins, saved over years of hardship. I took only half enough to get me to the next town, but not so much that they would starve. Then I wrote a note, my hand shaking as I pressed the pencil to paper. Asterisk, I'm going to make things right, for Mary, for all of us. I swear it. Asterisk, I left it on the table where Mother would see it in the morning. Then, with one last look at the place that had been my home, I slipped out into the night. The road was long and dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I walked for hours, my feet aching, my breath fogging in the cold air. By dawn, I reached the next town, a bustling place compared to our hollowed-out village. The streets were crowded with carts and merchants, the air thick with the smell of coal and cooking meat. I needed work, just enough to keep me fed until I could find a way to make Thorne pay. A sign outside a tavern caught my eye. Asterisk laborers wanted, good pay. No questions. Asterisk inside. The air was thick with smoke and the sour stench of ale. A burly man with a scar across his nose eyed me from behind the bar. You looking for work, boy? I nodded. I can lift. I can haul. I don't mind hard labor. He smirked. That's what they all say. But the docks aren't for the weak. You'll start at dawn. Half pay till I know you won't run off. I didn't care. It was a start. The next weeks were a blur of back-breaking work-loading and unloading cargo, my hands blistering, my shoulders screaming in protest. But I didn't complain. Every ache, every bruise was a reminder of why I was here. Then, one evening, I heard talk that changed everything. Recruiters are in town, one of the dockworkers said between gulps of ale. Military, offering good coin for strong lads. My heart pounded. The military, it was a way out, a way to become something more than a beggar or a miner. And if I could, rise in rank, gain power, maybe then I could face Thorne. The next morning, I stood in line with dozens of other young men, all desperate for a way out of their misery. The recruiter, a sharp-eyed officer in a crisp uniform, looked me up and down. Ever fired a rifle? Boy, no, sir, I admitted. He smirked. No matter, we'll teach you. Sign here, and you'll get your first month's pay up front. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name, my real name, for the first time in years. Not the miner's boy, not stable hand. Me, as I walked away, the coins heavy in my pocket. I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope, but this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, because one day I would return, and Thorne would pay for what he'd done. The barracks smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and damp wool. I lay on my narrow cot, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the snores and restless movements of the other recruits. It had been 3 months since I'd signed my name on that recruitment paper, 3 months since I'd left my parents without so much as a proper goodbye. The guilt gnawed at me sometimes, but I pushed it down. There was no room for weakness here. Sergeant Briggs made sure of that. He was a mountain of a man, with a voice like gravel and a temper that could strip paint from walls. Every morning before dawn, he'd bellow us awake, his boots pounding the floorboards as he dragged the slowest men from their cots. Up, you worthless maggots. The enemy doesn't sleep, and neither do you. Training was brutal, marching for miles with full packs, drilling with rifles until our arms shook, crawling through mud while bullets whizzed over hedges blanks. But they still made my heart hammer against my ribs. Some men broke. They wept, begged to be sent home, or simply collapsed and didn't get up. I didn't break. Every time I wanted to fall, I thought of Mary, of Thorne's sneer when he refused her a doctor, and I pushed harder. One evening, after a particularly grueling drill, a fellow recruiter, lanky lad named Will, collapsed beside me in the mess hall, his hands trembling as he tried to lift his spoon. I don't know how much more of this I can take, he muttered. I chewed my tasteless stew and said nothing. Will glanced at me. You never talk much, do you? Where are you from? I hesitated. I hadn't spoken of home since arriving. But something about Will's tired eyes made me answer. A mining town up north. His eyebrows rose. So you're used to hard work. Then I gave a short nod. Will sighed. Wish I was. I was a clerk before this. Numbers and ink, not mud and rifles. He looked around, then lowered his voice. They say we're being shipped out soon. To India. You heard that? Whispers had been circulating for days. Trouble in the colonies. Reinforcements. Needed. The thought should have scared me. But all I felt was a grim satisfaction. Good. The sooner I saw real combat, the sooner I could rise in rank. The sooner I could go back. 2 weeks later, we boarded the ship. The voyage was hell. The stench of crowded bodies, the relentless sway of the deck, the groans of men succumbing to sickness, it was worse than the mines. I spent hours leaning over the rail, staring at the churning waves, wondering if my parents were still in that drafty attic. If Thorne still ruled like a king over his crumbling empire. Will, green-faced and miserable, slumped beside me one day. "If I die over there," he groaned, "tell my mother I didn't vomit on my uniform." I almost smiled, almost thought when land finally appeared on the horizon. The mood on the ship shifted. The jokes stopped. Men checked their rifles with nervous hands. Even Sergeant Briggs grew quieter, his usual tirades replaced by terse instructions. We docked under a blistering sun. The heat hit me like a physical blow, so different from the damp cold of home. The air smelled of spices and sewage, of sweat and something else, something tense, like a coiled spring. The rebellion had been simmering for months. We were told, discontent among the sepoys, whispers of mutiny. Our job was to reinforce the garrisons, to show the might of the British Empire. I didn't care about empires, but I knew how to follow orders. The first time I saw real combat was in a dusty village whose name I'd forget by morning. We'd been ambushed on patrol shots, ringing out from nowhere, men falling before they could even raise their rifles. I dove behind a crumbling wall, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the sergeant's shouts. Next to me, Will fumbled with his rifle, his breath coming in panicked gasps. "Focus," I snapped. "Aim, breathe, fire." I didn't have time to think. I raised my rifle, sighted a figure in the distance, and pulled the trigger. The kick against my shoulder was familiar. The man fell. I didn't let myself feel anything by the time the skirmish ended. 3 of our men were dead. Will was shaking, his uniform splattered with someone else's blood. I just reloaded my rifle and waited for the next order. That night, as the others drank to drown their nerves, Sergeant Briggs found me cleaning my gun. "You've got ice in your veins." "Oi," he grunted. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" I didn't look up. Necessity. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Stick with me. You might live through this." Months passed. Skirmishes blurred. Together, dust, blood, the acrid smell of gunpowder. I learned to move silently, to aim true, to ignore the screams. Will joked that I was turning into a ghost. Half dead already. Maybe I was. Then came the siege. A fortified town held by rebels, well armed and dug in. We were ordered to take it. The night before the assault, Will sat beside me, scribbling a letter he'd probably never send. "You ever think about what you'll do after this?" he asked. I sharpened my bayonet. "No, liar." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone's got something waiting for them. A girl, a farm, a pub. I thought of a cold attic, a grave with no marker, a man who needed killing. "Maybe," I said. The next morning, we attacked at dawn. It was chaos. Cannon fire shook the ground. Men fell screaming. I kept moving, firing, reloading. My world narrowed to the next shot, the next enemy. Then pain. A searing hot line across my side. I stumbled, looked down. Blood seeped through my uniform. Will dragged me behind cover, his face pale. "Stay with me, you stubborn bastard." I clenched my teeth. "Just patch it." The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to earn me a week in the field hospital, a hellish tent, reeking of blood and rot, where men died slowly of fever and festering wounds. I didn't die when I emerged. Gaunt but alive, Sergeant Briggs was waiting. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," he said, tossing me a new insignia. I stared at it. "What? You're being promoted?" Seems cold-blooded killers are in short supply. I should have felt something, pride maybe. But all I thought was, one step closer. Will clapped me on the back later, grinning. "Look at you, officer and a gentleman." I adjusted my new coat. "Not a gentleman." He laughed. "No, you're something else." That night, I wrote a letter, my first since leaving England. "Mother, father, I'm alive. I'm coming back." I didn't say one dot because, first, I had a war to finish. and then a reckoning to deliver. The wound in my side still ached when it rained. A surgeon had dug the bullet out with hands still shaking from the last patient's screams, and the scar it left behind was jagged and ugly. I didn't mind. Pain was a reminder of survival, of purpose. Thought India had changed me. The heat, the blood, the endless stretches of waiting between bursts of violence it had sanded away whatever softness remained after the mines. Men who had once called me quiet now called me something else behind my back. The Revenant, a ghost who walked through battles untouched, who killed without hesitation. I didn't correct them. The promotion brought new responsibilities. I was no longer just a rifle to be pointed at the enemy. Now I helped decide where to aim. Sergeant Briggs now, Captain Briggs grunted approval at my tactics, though he still eyed me like a man trying to solve a puzzle. "You're not in this for Queen and country, are you, Lieutenant?" he asked one evening as we pored over maps. I didn't look up. "Does it matter?" he chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. "Not to me, but one day someone's going to ask you what you are in it for." I traced a route through enemy territory with my finger. Let them ask. The war dragged on. Villages burned. Men on both sides died for causes they barely understood. Well, now my unofficial second kept his humor through it all, though his jokes grew darker as the bodies piled higher. "You know what the worst part is?" he muttered after a particularly bloody ambush. "I'm getting used to this." I cleaned my pistol. "That's how you live. Some life." I had no answer for that. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived on a sweat-stained piece of paper, delivered by a courier with dust-cracked lips. Will brought it to me where I sat sharpening my knife. "Orders," he said. "For you." I unfolded it, expecting another assignment, another village to pacify. Instead, 4 words made my blood freeze. "Return to England immediately." No explanation, no details, just a summons home. Will frowned at my expression. "Bad news." I stood, my mind already racing. "I need to speak to Briggs." The captain read the orders with a furrowed brow. "Odd. They're not even routing you through command." He squinted at the seal. "This came straight from the War Office. You got friends in high places, Lieutenant." I thought of the drafty attic, the unmarked grave, the man who had killed my sister, as surely as if he'd held the pillow over her face himself. "No," I said, "but I have enemies." The voyage home was a blur of restless pacing and sleepless nights. Had something happened to my parents? Had Thorne somehow learned I was alive? Or worse, had he forgotten me entirely, leaving my revenge meaningless? England was rain and fog when I finally saw it again. The docks stank of fish and sewage, the air so thick with moisture it felt like breathing through wool. A stiff-backed officer met me as I disembarked. "Lieutenant," he asked. When I nodded, he handed me another letter. "You're to report to Colonel Whitmore at once." The name meant nothing to me. Why? The officer's lip curled. "I don't question orders." "Neither should you." Whitmore's office was all polished wood and leather, the windows overlooking a parade ground where new recruits drilled in perfect lines. The man himself sat behind a desk that could have fed a mining family for a year, his uniform immaculate, his mustache trimmed with military precision. "Ah, our hero from India," he said, not rising. "Sit." I remained standing. "With respect, sir, I'd like to know why I was recalled." Whitmore steepled his fingers. "Because you're wasted in the colonies. A man with your particular skills is needed here." I said nothing. He sighed. "There's trouble in the north. Labor unrest. Miners and mill workers getting ideas above their station. We need men who understand those people, who can manage them." My hands clenched behind my back. "You want me to police my own?" "I want you to prevent rebellion," he corrected. "These radicals are spreading dangerous ideas. Equality, workers' rights." He said the words like they were diseases. "We can't have that." I thought of my father's broken hands, of the way Thorne had looked at us like we were less than human. No, I agreed softly. We can't. Whitmore smiled. Good. You'll be stationed in Yorkshire. There's a particular mine owner there who's been having trouble, man named Thorne. The name hit me like a rifle butt to the chest. Thorne, I repeated, my voice perfectly calm. Yes, nasty business with some agitators last month. 2 men hanged, but the unrest continues. You'll assist local forces in maintaining order. He pushed a file toward me. Familiarize yourself with the situation. You leave tomorrow. I took the file. My hands didn't shake. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine mist. I walked until I found a pub, then sat in a dark corner with a whiskey I didn't drink, staring at the file. Inside were reports of strikes, of protests, of men beaten bloody for demanding fair wages, and at the center of it, Thorne, he'd grown richer, crueler. The file mentioned a recent incident where he'd locked striking miners in a shed and set it alight. 3 had died. The local magistrate paid for by Thorne, no doubt had, ruled it an accident. I closed the file. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. They were sending me back to where it had all begun, back to him. But not as a beggar, not as a victim, as a weapon. I drank the whiskey in one burning gulp and stood tomorrow. I would see Thorne again, and this time he would be the one afraid. The train north smelled of coal smoke and damp wool, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks like the steady march of soldiers. I sat by the window, watching England blur past green fields, giving way to the soot-stained hills of the north. The file from Whitmore lay open on my lap, but I wasn't reading it. I already knew every word. Thorne had expanded his empire. The railway that had stolen our home now fed directly into his new mills, where children as young as Mary had been, when she died, crawled under worry machines to clear jams. His mines had swallowed 3 more villages. The people turned out with less warning than we'd been given, and the bodies piled up accidents. The reports called them Kevins, fires, unexplained disappearances. The train slowed as we approached the station. My station, the one built on the land where our cottage had stood. I stepped onto the platform, my boots scraping against stone that had once been our garden. The air was thicker here, heavy with the taste of iron and burning coal. It hadn't changed. But I had. The officer sent to meet me was young, his uniform too crisp, his mustache too carefully waxed. "Lieutenant," he asked, snapping a hasty salute. "Corporal Dawes, sir. I'm to escort you to headquarters." I shouldered my pack. "Later. First, I want to see the town." Dawes blinked. "Sir, walk with me, Corporal." The streets were narrower than I remembered, the buildings leaning against each other like drunkards. Faces peered from doorways, hollow-cheeked, wary. Some things hadn't changed at all. Dawes kept pace beside me, his boots clicking nervously. "The unrest has been worst near the main pit, sir. The men are refusing to work until safety measures." "I've read the reports," I interrupted. We turned a corner, and there it was, the Thorne estate. The manor house loomed behind iron gates, its windows gleaming like the eyes of a well-fed predator. A carriage rolled through the gates, the crest on its door unmistakable. Dawes followed my gaze. "Mr. Thorne is hosting the magistrate tonight, sir. Perhaps you should not tonight." I turned away. "Where are the miners quartered now?" The corporal hesitated. "The old stables, mostly. And ... well, you'll see." He led me to the edge of town, where the trees had been cleared for rows of squat, windowless shacks. The air smelled of sewage and rotting wood. A woman in a tattered shawl hauled water from a communal pump, her arms trembling with the weight. I knew those arms, that face, though it was gaunt now, the lines around her eyes deeper. Mother, she didn't recognize me at first. Why would she? The boy who'd left was gone. The man who stood before her was a stranger in a uniform. Then her eyes met mine. The bucket fell, water sloshing over my boots. Her hands rose to her mouth. I didn't embrace her. Not here. Not with Dawes watching. But I let her see my face. Let her know it was really me. "Ma'am," I said evenly. Why her voice was a whisper. "You're alive." Dawes shifted uncomfortably. You know this woman, sir. I kept my eyes on hers. No, but she reminds me of someone. Mother understood. She bent to retrieve the bucket, her movements slow with age and hunger. The lieutenant is kind, she murmured. Many wouldn't stop to notice us at all. I wanted to ask about father, about how they'd survived, about whether they'd gotten my letter. But Dawes was watching, and questions would raise suspicions. Instead, I reached into my coat and pressed a coin into her hand, enough for food, not so much as to invite theft. Our fingers brushed, her skin paper thin. "Corporal," I said, turning away, "show me the rest." As we walked, Dawes grew bolder. "The men here are ripe for rebellion, sir. They whisper about unions, about striking. Last month, someone sabotaged one of Thorne's elevators, cost him a day's production. I kept my voice neutral. Was anyone punished? 3 men were flogged, but the agitators are getting smarter." He lowered his voice. "There's talk of a leader, someone organizing in secret. That stopped me." "A name," Dawes shook his head. "No one will talk. But they call him the Colliery Ghost." The name sent a chill through me. Ghosts were supposed to haunt the living, to remind them of their sins. Perhaps I wasn't the only one who wanted revenge. Headquarters was a squat brick building that had once been a schoolhouse. Maps of the mines in town were pinned to the walls, red marks showing trouble spots. A sergeant saluted as we entered. "Lieutenant, welcome. Colonel's orders came this morning. You're to have full authority over local forces regarding labor matters." He handed me a key. "Your quarters are upstairs." I took the key. "I want every report on Thorne's operations for the past year, and a list of every man flogged or arrested in the last 6 months." The sergeant exchanged a glance with Dawes. "That's quite a lot of paper, sir." I held his gaze. "Fetch it." The documents arrived in crates. I spent the night poring over them, cross-referencing names, dates, incidents. Patterns emerged. Thorne's cruelty had grown bolder, but so had the resistance. Equipment failures. Deliberate slowdowns. A foreman found beaten in an alley, the same foreman who'd evicted my family. And then, in a report from 3 months ago, a name that made my breath catch. Ethan Hale, minor, arrested for incitement, sentenced to 30 lashes, died in custody. Father. The paper crumpled in my fist. A knock at the door. Dawes, his face pale. "Sir, there's been an incident at the pit. A collapse. At least 20 men trapped." I was already reaching for my coat. "Thorne, on site, sir. He's refusing to halt operations to rescue them." Of course he was. Men were cheaper than lost production. The pit was chaos when we arrived. Women screamed names into the dark mouth of the mine. Children clung to their skirts. Thorne stood apart, his greatcoat pristine, barking orders to keep the pumps running. He was older, heavier, but I'd have known him anywhere. The way he held himself, like the world existed only to serve him. The cold indifference in his eyes, as a woman begged him to save her husband. I strode forward, Dawes at my heels. Thorne turned, his lip curling at my uniform. Finally, he sneered. "About time the army sent someone to control these animals." I stopped an arm's length from him, close enough to smell his cologne, to see the pores on his nose. "You'll halt operations immediately. Every able man will assist in the rescue." Thorne's face darkened. "I don't take orders from you'll take them from me." My voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Or I'll have you arrested for negligent homicide." The crowd had gone silent, listening. Thorne glanced at them, then at the armed soldiers at my back. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Who are you?" he demanded. I leaned closer so only he could hear. "The boy from the stables, Mary's brother." His eyes widened. Recognition, then fear. I stepped back, addressing the crowd. "Every man here will be paid full wages for rescue work. Medical care will be provided to the injured. And this mine will not reopen until an inspector confirms it's safe." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hope, disbelief. Thorne found his voice. You can't. I can. I turned to Dawes. Escort Mr. Thorne to his home. He's not to leave until I permit it. As the soldiers led him away, the crowd parted from me. Their faces were wary, but something else flickered there too. Something like hope. A small hand tugged my coat. A boy, no older than 6. "Sir," he whispered, "are you the ghost?" I looked down at him, at his toothed frame, his 2 old eyes, Mary's eyes. "No," I said softly, "but I'm here to help him." That night, as I sat in my quarters cleaning my pistol, a knock came 3 soft raps. Then, to dot, the door opened before I could answer. Mother stepped inside, her shawl drawn tight. Behind her stood a man I barely recognized, gray-haired, hunched, but with fire still in his eyes. Not father, Uncle Jonas, my father's brother, the ghost. He said, grinning, "knew you'd come back." Mother embraced me then, her tears hot against my neck. "They told us you were dead. After your father, ... I held her tight." I know. Jonah sat heavily in my chair. Been causing Thorne some trouble since Ethan died. Sabotage. Stirring the men up. He nodded at my uniform. "Didn't expect you to come back, wearing their colors, though." I set the pistol down, their authority. My purpose. Jonah studied me. "And what's that?" "Justice." Mother's hands tightened on mine. "He's powerful. Son, connected." I thought of Whitmore, of the way power truly worked in England, not as connected as I am now. Jonas leaned forward. "Then what's the plan?" Outside, the wind howled through the streets. The same wind that had howled through our attic the night Mary died. First I said, "We saved those men in the mine." Then, I met his gaze. "Then we bury Thorne." The cold morning air made my breath puff like smoke as I stood by the broken mine. 3 sunrises had come since the tunnel fell in. Women wrapped in thin shawls huddled together, their eyes stuck on the dark hole where their men were trapped. Little ones sat quiet, holding tight to their mama's skirts. More strong would hear. I called to the workers. My throat hurt from giving so many orders. Next to me, young Davy, his face already lined like an old man's, wiped his dirty hands on his pants before grabbing another beam. Dawes came up holding a chipped cup. "Sir, you need rest." The tea inside had gone cold. I shook my head. "Not till we find them." A shout came from deep in the tunnel. "Here, we found them." The ground shook a little as we ran. Our lanterns showed a gap in the fallen rocks, and behind it, movement. "Careful now," I warned as we moved stones. One by one, we pulled them out. 8 men, blinking like owls in the light. There was Mr. Wilkins, who used to let me feed his chickens. Old Mr. Harris, who'd lost fingers to Thorne's machines last winter. Their tired faces lit up when they saw the sky. People rushed forward, crying happy tears. A tiny girl yelled, "Papa," and jumped into a miner's arms. Then Thorne's mean voice ruined everything. "This costs too much money. Get back to work." I turned to see him yelling at the foreman, his fancy coat clean, his shoes shiny. The miner's smiles disappeared. Before I could move, Widow Meg stepped in front of Thorne. "My man's still down there." Thorne smirked. He knew the dangers. That did it. I marched over and grabbed Thorne's fancy collar, pushing him against the mine lift. The metal groaned. "Listen close," I hissed in his ear. "We save every man. Families get paid. Or I'll tell everyone about your broken safety rules." His eyes got big, like a scared rabbit. "You wouldn't." I squeezed tighter. "Try me." That night in the tavern's back room, I met the real ghosts. The air smelled like old beer and wet dog. Uncle Jonas sat with 6 others. Miners, mill hands, even a skinny teacher. Widow Meg looked me up and down. "So the soldier boy wants to help." I put my gun on the scratch table. "I know how to stop Thorne." The teacher, Mr. Price, adjusted his glasses. "He owns the judges and newspapers." Jonas grinned. "Show them your paper." I unfolded a letter with an important seal. "This says I can investigate." Meg whistled. "How'd you get that?" "Army secrets." I spread mine maps. Where does Thorne hide his real books? Mr. Price smiled. Now we're talking. For 2 days, I played the good soldier by day, while Jonah's friends brought me proof at night. Papers showing stolen wages, broken machines, even payments to crooked judges. Then came the worst find. Sir, a stable boy stopped me at midnight. He handed me a dirty bundle for you. Inside was a tiny shirt, ripped with dark stains, Mary's size. A note said, East Tunnel, third beam. My hand shook. The hidden room smelled like bad dreams. Chains on the walls, little handprints in the dirt. And in the corner, ... Jonas turned away sick. Dear Lord, bones, small ones. The lantern flickered as my ears rang. Jonas was saying words about proof in courts, but all I saw was Mary's smile. The jail smelled worse than the mines. Thorne's fancy clothes looked silly behind bars. You, he scrambled back. I want my lawyer. I locked the door. You don't understand. He was crying. Now it was just business. I took off my gloves. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet. Was my sister just business? He wet his pants then. Morning birds were singing when I stepped outside. The guard saw my dirty uniform and looked away. He hurt himself. I said. The guard nodded fast. As the town woke up, I saw something new. People standing straight. Miners walking tall. Jonas found me watching the sunrise. Your ma's making breakfast. I'll go. And then I looked at Thorne's big house where men were carrying out boxers. Then we fixed things. For the first time in forever, the air smelled clean. The morning frost crunched under my boots as I walked to Mother's new home. The small cottage stood where Thorne's old stable used to be, its stone walls strong against the cold. Through the window, I saw Mother moving about the kitchen, her shadow dancing in the firelight. She moved easier now, with good food and no more fear. Lieutenant Jonas came hurrying up the path, his breath making little clouds. They're here, the men from London. I adjusted my new coat. The letter had come 7 days ago. Important men were coming to check Thorne's mines. What they found would decide if I stayed an officer or got in trouble. The town square buzzed with people. A fancy black carriage stood by the judge's office, its shiny paint reflecting the pale winter sun. 3 stern-looking men in neat uniforms studied papers while another man wrote things down. The leader was Colonel Vickery, straight as a board, with eyes like ice. Lieutenant Vickery's voice could freeze water. Your reports were very detailed. I stood tall, sir. He held up one of Thorne's secret books. These payments to judges, you're sure they're real? Every one, sir. We checked the court records. Vickery looked at the crowd gathering behind us. Miners, shopkeepers, all watching quietly. And the ... other thing. Jonas stepped forward. This way, sir. The walk to the mine was quiet. Snow muffled our steps as we entered the east tunnel, our lanterns making big shadows. When we reached the hidden room, even Vickery went pale. Good Lord. The small bones had been placed carefully on clean cloth. Next to them lay a broken child's shovel. Vickery turned to me. How many? At least 12, sir, that we've found. My voice sounded far away. The foreman says they were orphan workers. But there's no records. Vickery's jaw tightened. London wants this quiet. No scandals. I looked him in the eye. These families deserve the truth, sir. We stared at each other a long moment. Then Vickery sighed. 1 week. Document everything. Then we destroy it. Outside, angry voices erupted. A man in a fine coat, Thorne's lawyer, was arguing with Widow Meg. You can't just take property. The lawyer yelled. Meg blocked his path. Watch me. I stepped forward. Which laws are those? The ones Thorne paid for. The lawyer looked nervous. This isn't proper. Vickery cut in. The Crown has taken Thorne's things for investigation. This mine is closed until it's safe. He turned to the crowd. Workers will get half pay during the closure. People murmured. Half pay wasn't much, but more than Thorne ever gave. That night, The tavern was full. Miners clinked mugs, voices loud with hope. At a corner table, Vickery drank whiskey while reading my notes. "This will ruin important men," he said quietly. I drank my ale. "Yes, sir." He studied me. "Why now, after so long?" Outside, the wind howled. For a second, I imagined I heard Mary laughing. "Because someone had to, sir." Vickery signed the last paper. 1 week, Lieutenant. The next days flew by. We talked to families, wrote down injuries, listed broken rules each night. Price and I worked in the old schoolhouse, checking names against records. On the 5th day, we found it. Look, Price's finger shook as it touched the page. This says 12 child workers came to Thorne's mill, but the orphan home only sent 6. I checked the papers, and these 6. Price pushed up his glasses. Never arrived. The fire popped as we stared at each other. Outside, wind rattled the windows like ghosts. At dawn, I stood by Mary's grave, snow dusting the ground. Mother placed winter berries on the mound. "They're hiding it, aren't they?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Most of it." She touched my arm. "We'll remember. All of us." At noon, the town gathered in the square. Vickery said Thorne's things would be sold. Some money would go to hurt workers' families. The rest to London. People left. The stable boy tugged my coat. He held out a small box. "For you," he whispered. Then ran. Inside was a child's ring, tarnished silver with a blue stone. Mary's birthday gift, stolen when we lost our home. My eyes burned. Widow Meg watched me. "He kept souvenirs," she said simply. That night's bonfire lit up the sky. We burned Thorne's lies, his fake records, bad contracts. But first we read every name, the lost, the gone, the hurt. As flames climbed, Price began a mining song. Others joined, deep voices like distant thunder, women's voices clear as bells in the flickering light. I saw them, not ghosts, but memories. Father lifting me onto his shoulders, Mary chasing butterflies, our family before the mines broke us. Vickery appeared beside me. "We leave at dawn." I nodded. My work here was done. But as I turned, the stable boy caught my hand. "Will you come back?" I looked at the faces glowing in firelight. Jonas, Meg, Price, all who'd fought with me. "Yes," I said, and meant it. Walking home, the last embers faded. Mother had left a candle in the window, light against the dark. Out there, some bad men would escape. The world would keep turning, but here, things were fair again. For now, that was enough. The London train whistled as it pulled into the station, its black smoke mixing with the morning fog. I stood on the platform, my uniform crisp, my bag light. 3 months had passed since the bonfire, since I'd promised that boy I'd return. "Lieutenant," a young soldier ran up, saluting. "Colonel Vickery's compliments." "Sir, your meeting is at 10. I checked my pocket watch, a gift from the miners, engraved with Mary's initials. 2 hours to spare. Tell the colonel I'll be there. The streets of London smelled of coal and money. Rich men in top hats stepped around poor ones sleeping in doorways. I walked until I found a quiet church, its stone walls damp with dew. Inside, a priest eyed my uniform. "May I help you, son?" "I'm here to see the orphanage records, from 1845 to present." His smile faded. "Those are private, my boy." I placed Whitmore's letter on the table between us, its seal gleaming. Not anymore. The books were moldy, their pages sticking together. But after 3 hours, I found them 12 names listed as transferred to northern work programs that matched Thorne's ledgers. None had ever returned. The clock struck 9:30 as I entered the War Office. Vickery waited in his usual stiff posture, but his eyes looked tired. "You're late." I placed the orphanage records beside his tea. "No, sir. I'm thorough." He flipped through the pages, his frown deepening. "This goes higher than Thorne." "Yes, sir. All the way to Parliament." Vickery rubbed his temples. "Whitmore wants this buried." I stood my ground. "The families deserve to live, Lieutenant." He slammed his hand down. "Do you know what happens to troublemakers? To their families? Outside, rain began pattering against the windows. Somewhere in my mind, Mary laughed again. I do, sir, Vickery, study me. Then sighed. 1 week, take whatever evidence you need north. Then the investigation closes. The train ride home felt longer this time. The documents in my bag weighed more than my pistol ever had. Jonas met me at the station. His grin wide. Took you long enough. The town looked different, cleaner somehow, though the mines still loomed in the distance. New signs hung over shops. Children played in the square where Thorne's man used to patrol. Mother hugged me tight when I walked in, her hands no longer shaking. You're just in time. For what? She smiled, leading me outside. The whole town was gathering at the old meeting hall. Miners in clean shirts, women with mended dresses. Even the school children. Price stood at a makeshift podium, adjusting his spectacles. As our new elected representative, I hereby declare this archive open. They'd turned the schoolhouse basement into a record room. Shelves held every document we'd saved from Thorne, and new ones, carefully copied by hand. Meg handed me a small book. We've been busy. Inside were names, dates, stories, every accident, every stolen wage, every missing child, written plain so no one could ever forget. Price cleared his throat. We thought you should have the first one. The stable boy, clean now, with proper shoes, tugged my sleeve. You came back? I knelt to his level. I told you I would. That night, we lit another bonfire, but this time we added to it page by page. Families came forward with their own stories to be recorded. The flames burned brighter with every truth told. As the embers faded, Jonas clapped my shoulder. What now, Lieutenant? I watched the sparks dance upward, toward the stars. Now we live. Mother took my arm as we walked home. The cottage windows glowed warm against the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sang. It wasn't perfect justice. The powerful would still be powerful. The world would still be unfair. But here, in this small corner of it, we'd planted something that might grow. And that, finally, was enough.